okay? You got me? There. Oh, you can hear me? Yeah. How's everybody? Is that too loud? It feels loud to me. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I'm exhausted, but that's no excuse. A couple of things before we get started, and I think I should tell. Christy, who usually sits right up here, she was one of the people whose condominium was destroyed, and she lost everything in that fire in Carmel. I was gone. I don't know exactly when it happened. When did it happen?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yeah,
Yesterday morning. So she's not here tonight. She's almost always here. We'll figure out. I mean, the church has reached out to her, and we'll figure out something. But she lost. Apparently, she got out with her pajamas, her cat, and her purse, and lost everything else. So, which is sad. That's a rough one. Yeah, I'm sort of like this still. We had to go to Florida, but it wasn't for fun. And it was a lot of work. And then we had to drive back. We had to do a funeral and drive back. So, man, I'm just going to say this. Come on in. I haven't started yet, and it's nothing you guys don't already know. I am on a what's the right word? A journey to not having as much stuff as some people have. But they had 2 houses, and they were big houses. And a lot of the stuff in the houses were from Jennifer's grandmother. I was going to bring an Oriental rug back that they had because we'd seen it all of Jennifer's life. It had been in her grandmother's house, and it was bigger than any room in my house. It was 28 by 18. Now, I have no idea. It's been in the family for 100 years, and that's the kind you see in mosques, you know. Once I looked at it, I said, "Honey, we have an Odyssey van. I can't, even if we rolled it up, and folded it in half, it's 14 feet long." So we didn't bring it back. So anyway, can you imagine? Who has? Anyway, then you get the scale of the house. So anyway, I just want you to know we're going to do class 4 weeks in a row. Okay, we got 4 weeks in a row. On the 2nd of May they're going to be voting in here. Now I have no idea what they're voting for in Noblesville. You know, but this is where they do it. So we're going to have to move to another room, but I wasn't going to cancel class for that. Well, I'll get you out so you can all get home to see who won whichever mayor you're concerned about, you know, but we'll go 4 weeks. And then on the 16th of May, apparently my granddaughter in Colorado is graduating from the 5th grade. I'm just saying, when I graduated out of elementary school into junior high, and you were there, Dad, nothing happened. You know, I just changed buses. But she's got a big project that she's been working on, and apparently the tickets were purchased in January, and the dinners were decided for the celebration. And when I found out 3 days ago that I was supposed to preach that weekend, and that my wife was not pleased because I was the one who wasn't paying attention in January to the schedule change about our granddaughter's graduation from the 5th grade. So anyway, we're not having class on the 16th. I will be buoyant, is that the word? Effervescent with congratulatory language about that 5th grade graduation. And then, guys, we're starting chapter 15. And 16 only has a few verses in it. So we might be done. I don't have anything in the way after the 16th that I know of, but we should be able to finish by then. I mean, I'm not happy about that, but I'm kind of happy. I mean, it's like, I've been doing Mark for a long. My Bible just won't even open to anything but Mark right now. But yeah, and then we'll have to figure out. By then, I am going to halftime September 1st. And I still haven't figured out whether that means I'm a halftime teaching pastor or I'm a halftime mentor pastor. I don't know. So we'll find out. That's not in my, what's the word? I just get to suggest what I would like to do. But they got to, and that will be a change for me. This was an interesting last week for us because the passing of her uncle, he was the lodestar, if you will, of that whole family. And he was 97, but he was still, I had some really cogent conversations with him in the last week before he passed away. Suddenly, he fell and broke his arm, and it just tanked him. And it's interesting how quickly a lot of things have just changed. Does that make sense? Like a lot of traditional things and a lot of stuff happened really fast. And I'm feeling a loss because he's my wife's uncle, and so he has daughters and grandchildren over here, and they're making all the decisions that impact us. And I'm feeling that loss of locations because it's so the family had 2 homes in Florida. That's what we had to get. But when I got there, what I found out was that they'd already sold them, and that the contents were sold except for a few tagged things. And that was just weird, just weird. And so I'm dealing with, I guess it's grief. Different kinds of grief. I've never had this happen to me before. Multiple levels of the loss of, because my wife and I went to Boca Grande, to the home down there. Our family went there every year for like 40 years. They sold that house in an hour. I won't even tell you how much. But they just, it is gone, done. We all met there for the funeral was on Boca, and we were in the house, but everybody who was there, all the family members, and we said goodbye to it. And when we left, we knew we'd probably never come back to Boca Grande again. And yet my children grew up going there for spring break, and we went down in the winters and spent time with their aunt and uncle. And it's just a loss of a lot. So anyway, you don't need to hear me chatter on about that. But I also will say this. I don't know if any of you went to the Good Friday service, but it was kind of like coming to class, wasn't it, when I spoke? But that was a really good service. But I've been living in this section of the crucifixion and the resurrection. I'm doing Steph Palich's funeral this Friday, and it's my living in this has really given me some new things to say about the hope of the resurrection and what it really means, because we have been talking about that in this class a lot, what it means when people say that Jesus was raised from the dead, and we'll get way into it later. But to live in this section of the scripture for so long has been heart-altering to me. And I just am thankful that I'm doing this work while this other stuff is going on. Because there is great, I have no doubt about Jennifer's aunt and uncle's presence with the Lord in some manner, and their resurrection in a manner that it looks like what Jesus was when he was raised from the dead. And that is all very encouraging to me in the midst of all the other stuff. So anyway, well, let's get going. We are in chapter 15. We're at verse 1 in chapter 15. Let me pray for us, and then I'll read the passage. Lord, I am so thankful for your love for us, for the hope that we have in you. I pray that we will not take these passages as some sort of literary study, but that we will see it as that it is your giving us a picture of the depth of your love for us and the way that you have worked in history to give us hope for eternity. I pray that that will be the primary picture that we get from this passage. Also, Lord, that you will be honored as we talk in depth about what happened to your Son on our behalf. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty, we're in chapter 15, and let me read. I'm going to read through verse 15. I brought notes that far. I don't know if we'll get that far, but this is a section that works together well. It's very early in the morning. The leading priests and elders and teachers of the religious law, the entire high council, met to discuss their next step. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replied, "You have said it." Then the leading priest kept accusing him of many crimes, and Pilate asks him, "Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they are bringing against you?" But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during Passover celebration to release one prisoner, anyone the people requested. One of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising. And the crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. "Would you like me to release to you this king of the Jews?" Pilate asked. For he realized by now that the leading priest had arrested Jesus out of envy. But at this point, the leading priest stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. Pilate asked them, "Then what should I do with this man you call the king of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him." So to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Okay, last time we were together, we finished up that business about Peter and his emotional response to realizing that Jesus' prediction of his coming betrayal had been completely fulfilled. That's where we stopped the last time. And at this point, Mark is done with Peter. He's going to get mentioned later, but we're not going to talk about him ever again. We're not going to talk about really anybody else but Mark's primary subject, and that is Jesus. We have moved back to what the point of the book is again, and that is what was happened to Jesus, or what Jesus' life was like. And we are into, to be perfectly honest, a lot of scholars have referred to all of the Gospels, but primarily the Synoptics and Mark in particular, as it is a story of the trial, crucifixion, and death and resurrection of Jesus with a really long introduction, because that's what this is all about. That we are now into the primary stuff. And he starts out, it says in the NLT, it says very early in the morning, but actually the very first words in this chapter, in this section, it goes, and immediately. And immediately. Because what Mark, and you've heard me say this before, that in this book, he uses that word, that euthos word that means right now, right, really quickly, immediately, all the time, to push things forward. And what he's trying to say right now, the reason he says and immediately is because there's some stuff that needs to be done right now by these chief priests and the elders and the scribes if they plan on getting what they want accomplished, and that's Jesus killed by the Romans. And we'll get to the reasons later, but it says immediately, early, and then the Greek becomes really difficult to translate. It can either be translated, the Greek itself it's sumobolion edemostantes is what it is in the Greek, and it's very hard to translate. In fact, I read about 12 different translations of it, and they all go one way or the other. It can either mean that very early the chief priests, let me look at the Greek, it says a council preparing, and then it goes chief priests, elders, and scribes, and they either made a plan or they met as a council. Okay, can you see, is it up there? Yeah. See it? There it is. It can either mean they came together to talk about something, or it means they made a plan when they were together. Now, can I just say, I think the Greek is very confusing here because both are true. We don't know. They may have been up all night making a plan, and we know they got together. And we know that they did this because they've got something really important to take care of. And what it is that they have to come up with some kind of plan to make sure that the Romans will kill Jesus. If you remember the last time we met, or no, it was the time before that, when they had interrogated Jesus, they'd come to the conclusion that he needed to die because he had blasphemed, that he had claimed things that could only be claimed by God. He had said things that had put him over the pale in terms of what they would allow to continue to live. And that stuff was meaningless to the Romans. They don't care. They're not going to put anybody to death for blasphemy in the Jewish sense. And so they have to come up with some kind of plan that would make the Romans raise their eyebrows seriously, okay? And I can give you here are the primary things that Romans would put somebody to death over. Treason, and it's not treason against the Jews, it's treason against Rome. For sedation, which is planning to overthrow, and leading the general population in a riot against the rule of Rome. And one other was convincing people not to pay their taxes. If you could prove that somebody was doing any of that stuff, if they had witnesses that said you did that, the Romans are happy to put you to death. But they're not going to put you to death because you claim to be the Son of God, or that kind of thing. They don't care about that. And so this is what they're meaning about. And Mark describes this as all the Sanhedrin, or the entire Sanhedrin. Now, what the entire Sanhedrin knew, and this is why it's important to know about the immediately early. What the entire Sanhedrin knew is that Roman officials began their day at sunrise. Okay? As soon as the sun came up, that's when business started. They got up early enough so that they were prepared. And for a Roman ruler to hold court, it started as soon as the sun came up. And it only went until mid-morning, like not even afternoon. And the reason is this: Roman gentlemen did not do work after mid-morning. There were too many leisurely things for well-placed Roman citizens. There were too many things for them to do that showed they don't need to work all day, but that they have other important things to do, like go to the baths or hang out. I don't know what they did, but it was first come, first serve if you wanted to have an interaction with a Roman ruler. Pilate did not live in Jerusalem. He lived in Caesarea Maritima, which is up the coast. That's where he lived. He came down to Jerusalem during the Passover feast, and I'm sure I've said something about this before, but he's not there because he wants to celebrate the Passover with the Jews. What he wants to do is he wants to make sure that everybody knows that he's there, and they better behave because he's going to take names, and you know what, if anybody messes up. He knows that when the population of Jerusalem grows by 10 times at Passover time, that everybody's going to get worked up politically about freeing themselves from the Romans. And so he comes down, and guess where he stays? He stays in Herod the Great's palace. Now, Herod the Great is the Herod now of Jesus. He's the guy that was alive when Jesus was born. He's the guy that started the temple. He's the guy that built all he's the big shot. And he worked really hard. What do you call those people that go to the government and try to get lobbying Caesar to get him retitled King of the Jews. When he died, his title did not pass on to his children because it was only given to him. And Herod had built for himself a massive palatial home in Jerusalem. But when Pilate comes to town, it doesn't matter who's living in Herod's palace. They have to make room because he gets to move in and stay there. Why? Because he's Pilate. He's the Roman ruler. We'll talk about what he actually is. Yeah, and there, look there. The remains of Herod's palace in Jerusalem. Looks pretty big to me. Well, what everybody in Jerusalem knew, that if they wanted to have any business to do with Pilate, they needed to be there before sunrise and get in line. Because he was only going to work till about 10:30. And when the time was done, he was done. And they knew that he was going to work that day. And so, what do the Sanhedrin guys have to do? They've got to get Jesus over to Herod early enough so that they can make sure they get in line in time to get Herod's attention, or Pilate's attention. Does this make sense? I'm getting all these guys mixed up. But is this making sense? This is really a practical moment. This is why immediately they do this, because they get one shot at it. One shot. And they want to do it when what? Most of the people are what? Sleeping. Want to get there early. Now, we're going to find out that there's a lot more going on at that moment, but it says, very early in the morning, the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of the religious law. Now, I want us to zero in on how small of a group of people. That says the entire high council is. There's Sanhedrin, that's the word there. At the most, it's 70 people, and we know that some of them were not down with this. That's an important number to keep in mind, that smallness of that number. Because you do know that what has been the undercurrent of anti-Semitic Christianity for centuries has been that the Jews killed Jesus. We're going to find out as we go through this, that it was only part of this council that wanted Jesus killed. Not the Jews, these Jews. That's really important for us to remember. It's really important to us. It says and I love the way they decided that they met to discuss their next step, or they made a plan, or something like that. They had to figure out some way to translate that funny phrase. They couldn't figure it. And then we get this interesting sentence that gives us 3 action words, and they are all rough. They're translated okay here, but it says they bound Jesus. This is a word that means that they roughly tied him up to make it difficult for him to move or walk or anything. That's binding is the essential aspect of it. That's the first, like he's a criminal that they need to worry about what? Running away. And then it says, first they bind him, and then it says they led him away. That means they drug him through the streets from where they were, where Caiaphas was, to Herod's temple, palace, where Pilate was staying. And then it says they took him to Pilate. That's the same word that is used over and over to talk about the rough way that John the Baptist was treated. It's the same word that is used when Judas hands Jesus over to the Roman, or to the guards. These are 3 actions that are all rough, hard. This is not like where they put their hand on his head so he doesn't bump his head when he gets in the car. This is, guys, you know what I'm talking about when I say that, because you see them do that when they put people in, criminals and stuff like that. This is really rough. It says they took him to Pilate, Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. This is the first mention of him. The reason that Mark can say Pilate is because everybody who would have ever read the Gospel of Mark would have known who he was talking about. Now, I want to get this right. Pilate is not his name. That's his family's last name, if you will. We call it like that. Pontius is his tribe, his family tribe. Okay? So Pontius Pilate, we don't know what his given name was. He is mentioned all over the place in historical writings. He's mentioned frequently for not cool reasons either, but he ruled from, I think, 26 to 36 AD. He was sent there because of his bad attitude, if that makes any sense. He was, what's this say? Discovered in Caesarea Maritime, the Pilate stone is a damaged block of carved limestone with a partially intact inscription attributed to and mentioning Pontius Pilate, a prefect of the Roman province of, I got the years right, Judea from AD 26 to 36. When they call him the governor, they didn't have governors, okay? He was a prefect. And he was sent there almost as punishment for being ruthless elsewhere. But they knew, and anybody that made that position in Judea took it as a punishment, okay? Because the Jews were the worst people to have to rule over in the whole of the Roman Empire. It was worse to get sent to Judea than it was to get sent, get this, to Hadrian's Wall. People preferred to go to the northern parts of Britain and deal with the Scots than to go deal with the Jews. Now think about that. And yet they sent Pilate there because they knew that he would be what? Rough. And boy was he. Boy was he. Another thing that's important to know is that when they gathered soldiers to fill the garrisons in places on the edges of the empire, they always chose the soldiers from peoples who hated the place they were going. So the soldiers when we get to the soldiers dealing with Jesus, these are all guys who came from somewhere where they just naturally hate Jews. So you've got Pilate. Did you know that he finally was taken away? The reason he got taken away was because he was so horrible to the Jews that they actually sent a group of people to Rome to beg them to get rid of him. And they did. They got rid of him. This is after this all happened. Now, I'm just going to say, the Ethiopian Coptic Christians have a story that Pontius Pilate became a follower of Jesus. He is a saint in the Coptic religion, okay? They see him as a benefactor because what they see when they read the text is that he's constantly trying to get Jesus free. He's asking all the questions to make it so that Jesus can be freed. Don't believe it for a minute. When we get into this, you're going to find out that what he's trying to actually do is to make all the Jewish rulers and people mad. He's trying to do exactly the opposite of what they want because he can't stand them and he wants to make them miserable. And that's why he's doing all this. And every time he says, King of the Jews, this, King of the Jews, he is grinding it in. Okay? This is a bad dude. I'm sorry that if any of you are from the Ethiopian Coptic background, they're just wrong. Because when they took him away, he went away in shame because he was too mean for the Romans. Think about that. And so when Mark says, took him to Pilate, it just says Pilate in the Greek text. And everybody knows who we're talking about. I mean, how many times do we have to say Adolf before Hitler to get to know who we're talking about? You know? So, and I also think it's interesting that no historian of any secular anything ever tells us what his first name is, because they don't want us to really be able to know who he actually was. They want to what? They want to mention him in a way that brings dishonor to his family because he's an embarrassment. Anyway, they took him to Pilate, the Roman governor, for the purpose of finding a way to convince Pilate, because now Pilate is the only guy, he's the only one who can make this happen for them. Nobody else. And this shows the futility, if you will, of the power of the Sanhedrin when it comes to this kind of thing. They can do some stuff, religious stuff, and they can do this and that, but they can't actually pull anything big off without one guy. And he's in town. And they got to get there before sunrise. And they got to drag Jesus there, and they got to find some way to make him look stupid. Can you put up the next verse? Are y'all tracking with me on this? I'm not overdoing it, am I? It's just that what says, and Pilate asks, are you the king of the Jews? Notice, we get nothing of what the Jews had said to Pilate about what he'd done wrong. Now, Luke does tell us what they accused Jesus of. The first go-round here, they say that he was encouraging people to not pay their taxes, and that he claimed to be the king of here we go. Of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. And Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered, you have said so. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. But they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and from Galilee even to this place. The actual words are that he causes a riot. He causes riots wherever he goes, is what the actual Greek in Luke says. And, oh, pardon? Oh, yeah. So, oh, it's a new, yeah. Oh, by the way, they put a Mac up there this week. And Jeff has never used a Mac in this. I don't know if you've ever used a Mac. And so he's learning right now to use that computer because Ryan was in here just a few minutes ago showing him how to use the Mac because they took his PC away from him. Go figure. So anyway, he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Clearly, that is what. See, but Mark doesn't even bring up what they talked about. He just says, Pilate. He wants to get to the point. Now, remember, Jesus has been slapped and punched and beaten around and he is not in the least bit a good-looking guy right now. He's been up all night. He's been treated terribly. He's tied up. And for Pilate, when he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" this is two things. First, he's asking Jesus if Jesus had actually said that he was. I'm sure that Pilate knew that any Jew who claimed to be the king that's somewhat against Rome. Does that make sense? To claim he's the king of the Jews? Only Rome gets to tell somebody if they're the king of the Jews. All right? But the second thing is, when he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" it's like all those people out there don't want him to be claimed the king of the Jews, and they particularly don't want this guy who looks like this. Later on, he's going to say, "What do I do with the king of the Jews, the one you call king of the Jews?" And they're not having that either because he's looking really rough. And this is a picture. Just think about it. He's a guy who's been roughed up to the point where his physical, he hasn't been, the horrible stuff hasn't happened, but he's still been roughed up enough by these people that he represents what Pilate thinks of all Jews, which are worthless, rough people that, you get what I'm saying? And so, did you lose that, Jeff? Did it? It stopped working? Okay, I'll just have to look at my Bible. Can we look at our Bible? That's okay. It says, the next thing that it says is that, I'm sorry that's not working. Boy, that's a big blank screen, isn't it? They're on the phone. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And the next thing Jesus answers is very, very vague. It's a hard to translate thing, and I want to get it just right. He says, "Su leges." And it is translated a whole bunch of ways. Have you guys ever seen how some people translate it like, "You have said it," or "You said it," or "That's what you say," or it's really difficult to fully translate it. And what he's actually doing is he's throwing this back on. He's not going to say it, because if he says, "Yes, I am the king of the Jews," if he says that, "Yes, I am king of the Jews," then that proves that the chief priests and the scribes and those guys are all right about Jesus. And so they've come with this accusation, and if Jesus says yes, then he's got a reason to go along with what they want. But if he says, "No, I'm not," It's impossible for him to convict Jesus if Jesus has contradicted that which they have claimed that he said. Because he's under, does this make sense? He's under oath, if you will, that he has to tell the truth to them. And so whatever he said, so he says something that is very hard to figure out. It's like, you said it. You said it. I'm the king of the Jews. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. This is an interesting moment. It's clear that Jesus was not going to give in to anybody. Here's the other thing. If Jesus had said, yes, I'm king of the Jews, it would have been a direct affront to the Romans. And Jesus was not here to deal with the Romans. He did not have a axe to grind with Rome. Does that make sense? He came to do something bigger. He had an axe to grind with sin. And he didn't want to get involved with a Roman political thing. He wanted to do the right thing in the moment that led to him being able to accomplish what he came to do, not to become some political figure. Is this all making sense? Is this all making sense? Oh, they're working on it. Do we want to take 5 minutes and see if they can fix this? This is a perfect, it's actually the time we take a break. So let's take 5 minutes and see if they can figure this out, because Barb is a Mac person. Just take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back, and we'll Some numbers? Okay, we'll wait a minute. I'm sorry if I seem really tired. Do I seem tired to you? I seem like I'm not, like I'm engaged as much as I can possibly be, I think. Yeah. Oh, we got home at 3 o'clock, but in the afternoon, but I had to then go to my tax person. Straight from unloading the car to the tax person.
So was the van full?
Pardon?
Was the van full?
Oh, no, the van wasn't that full. Oh, no. There was very little that had been tagged as being something that the family might want. And that had been done previous to us getting there. And then we had to, everything that had been tagged had to be packaged up in appropriate ways and then given to the people who were going to take it. And that's what we did. We got the stuff we got. I don't care about it. I mean, it's just it meant something to my wife. I did get 8 really cool whiskey glasses that I know that only ever had Highland Park scotch in them. I know that for a fact. And to me, I don't care if they're just in a box in the basement. I know I have them because her uncle told me that he bought them because he only really liked one kind of whiskey. And so he bought those glasses specifically to only put one kind of whiskey in them so that the other kind would not taint the glasses. Now, I'm just saying, who does that? So I'm going to just have to buy some Highland Park. I don't know if I don't know. I just have it. I'll just set them somewhere together. I don't know. Anyway, okay, where were we? Because can we put the scripture back up? Boom. Well, we just said the part where Jesus said, "You have said it." Now notice, the only question we get from Pilate here is related to what they must have accused him of. And then Mark doesn't tell, it says the leading priests kept accusing him of many crimes. This is where that shifts. They had to come up with something else. And I think that if you look at Luke carefully and you look at the way that it's constructed there, I think this is when they started to say, everywhere that Jesus goes, he causes riots among the people. Now, Pilate is a dictatorial ruler. Pilate was known to have hundreds of paid spies and people who were willing to take money to turn other Jewish people in. Pilate's only concern was that we don't have any problem where the army has to come in again and mess with these Jewish people. I guarantee you that Pilate would have known if everywhere Jesus went, he was causing a riot. This would have been one of the stupidest things for that. They would have been essentially accusing Pilate of not knowing what was going on under his own rule. And my feeling is that he's like, this is just not working, guys. You know, is this the best you can do? I mean, I know it's early in the morning for some of you, but I got other people in line here. I got things to do this afternoon. And the best you can do that he's causing riots everywhere? And he says, yes, aren't you going to answer them? This is many charges they're bringing against you. Clearly, they were not able to get their story straight. And even if they had some complaint that they could all agree on, it did not matter to him. Because, now just think a minute, it's Passover. He's got a Jewish man in front of him who has been what? Noted as a miracle-working prophet. And they want him to kill him at Passover. Well, that while the whole community is gathered in Jerusalem, this is the last thing he really wants to have to deal with. This is just tedious to him. And when he says to them, aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they're bringing against you? The language there is like multiple charges. And then it says this, and it's really interesting in the Greek. It goes, he says, it's double negative. It says, Jesus not nothing said. Not nothing. Which again, in English, that means he said a whole bunch. To not say nothing, but in Greek, it means double up. And the word that says, much to Pilate's surprise, that word in the Greek is the same word that is used to describe people's shock when Jesus works a miracle like making a blind man see or raising the dead. This is a moment where Pilate is completely taken aback by Jesus' silence. Now, people get really devotional about Jesus' silence here. I've read where they say that the reason that Jesus was silent was because he was giving an example to the early Christians about how they should silently respond to the accusations of being followers of Jesus. They should not get argumentative. They should not be that kind of people, but they should be like Jesus and just silently go to whatever happens. Just let whatever happens come. And they say that. Or that they say this is an absolute moment of Jesus fulfilling the prophecy. And isn't that what you put up earlier, Jeff, about the lamb to the slaughter and the silent? Didn't you put something up like that earlier from Isaiah? Yeah. That Jesus' silence is about this. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, say opened up not his mouth. This is a prophecy about what is coming to Jesus. I don't know that we have this example of Jesus' actions so that we know how we're supposed to act. There is some truth to that, but I do believe that this is absolutely the fulfillment of prophecy. Here's the bigger picture. The accusations against Jesus were irrelevant to whether or not he was going to try to defend himself, because what he was doing at the moment was he was taking on what? All of the sin of the world on his shoulders. He was taking on any accusation about any kind of anything onto his shoulders, and he's not going to defend himself because had he defended himself, what do you think would have been the response of the heavenlies if Jesus decided, I'm done with this, I'm not taking any more of this from you people? And do you know what would have shown up? The army of heaven would have shown up to take care of him. And it was like, boom. It would have just changed everything at that moment. But his purpose was to what? To take on that which he was not guilty of. And so they could accuse him of anything, and he would not answer it. It's a huge theological moment. And Pilate cannot believe it, because in almost every other instance Pilate has ever had anybody in front of him, the person accused is going to do the very best they can to what? Defend themselves, because they didn't have lawyers who did prosecutorial stuff or defense stuff. You got accused by witnesses, and then you responded yourself. Everything was on your own shoulders. They didn't have people who stood in the spaces and defended. And Jesus says nothing. He says nothing. It gets worse, though. It says, now it was Pilate's custom each year during Passover celebration to release one prisoner. There is absolutely no record of that anywhere. This is the only place in the Gospels it says that this happened. There are numerous examples of kind of that happening in other parts of the Roman Empire. It was never anything that anybody made note of. Clearly, if this is about 33 AD, Pilate's got 3 more years, so he's been there for maybe 6 previously years. Maybe a couple years in, he thought, well, I got to do something to show these people that, to pacify them a little bit. And so he started this process. But this is not common, just so we know, okay? It's not common. And it says, anyone the people requested. It doesn't say that in the Greek. It actually says anyone that they begged. The word is actually a word that means to ask for something with tremendous amount of emotion. And what Pilate apparently wanted was to see them begging greatly, that their emotional response to who they were going to let go needed to be such that he could, because remember, he's the only person that gets to make this decision. And so he's going to do what? He's going to make these Jews that he can't stand grovel if they're going to get something like this done. And then it says one of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas. Now, I think I mentioned this last time. This is not what it says. In the oldest text, it says was Jesus Bar Arbas. Bar is son. Abbas. You've heard Abba, Father. We all know that Greek word, Abba, Aramaic and Greek. It means father, or it can mean rabbi. This guy's name was Jesus, or Yeshua, as were 20% of the people living at the time. It's a ubiquitous name because Joshua was what? A huge hero of the Jewish people who what? Conquered the promised land, and he was like a person that everybody wanted their son to grow up and be like whom? Joshua. And so they felt names gave purpose to people and all that kind of stuff. So his name was the same as Jesus's, his given name. We lose it in the texts. I mentioned this, didn't I? Because the scribes later, about the 4th century, could not bring themselves to continue to call the guy that got off by the same name as the Savior of the world. Now, it is interesting that his name either means Jesus, the Son of the Father, which is actually Jesus, the Son of the Father, is who we worship, right? Or his name is Jesus, the Son of the Teacher. It works both ways. I mean, this is why Pilate is confused a bit about things here, because he's like, and in one of the other Gospels, he literally says, which Jesus do you want me to release? But that's been taken out. And we get, which of these two do you want me to read? So anyway, so here's Barabbas. Now, it says he was a revolutionary. Somehow, this guy, he clearly was the son of somebody important, because to call him the son of the Father or the son of the rabbi means everybody must have known something about him when they just brought it up. It's like they must have, because that's not anybody's name. Nobody's name is Abba. But his father was well known enough by this name that he had some standing. But he'd somehow gotten in with some people who were rebellious and causing trouble, riotous people who were trying to overthrow the government. We have no record of what rebellion this was. We don't know who he killed. We don't know when it happened. But what we do know is this. When you got arrested, you got tried immediately, and if you got found guilty, your execution was the next day. Okay? So what we have is, it says, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising, and that's just all we know about it. But what we also know is that the people who knew Barabbas, because that's the only thing we know to call him, knew what did they need to do? They needed to get to Pilate early the next morning because they knew he might let somebody go. And so they're there. There is a whole crowd there doing what? Emotionally begging. They're going to emotionally beg Pilate to let Barabbas go because they know if they don't get him let go right then, what's going to happen to him? He's going to get crucified with those other two guys that are about to get crucified. Does this make sense? Now think about it. This is the crowd that we're going to be talking about that's going to be screaming and yelling. They have no other intention to be there. They're not there primarily because they care. They probably don't know our Jesus from Grogan's goat. They may have heard of him, but they know that if they're not there early in the morning, worked up in a manner that makes it look like they're begging Pilate to let him go, that they're not going to get their man freed. This is the crowd we're talking about. Okay, does this make sense? This is a different thing than we usually think of. And it's not going to take... Can you put the next passage up, the next scripture up for me? The crowd went to Pilate. It actually says they went up to Pilate. It means that they came from the lower parts of the city and they came up to where Herod's palace was. It means that these were people who lived in the common people part of the city, and they came up to Pilate, and asked is not really the right word. It's that they begged, they requested in fervency for him to release a prisoner as usual. They want, why? Because he's got followers who know him. They want to be there early in the morning because they know this is their one shot. Because otherwise, this afternoon, they're crucifying him. Is this making sense? This is a really important difference that people don't talk about very often. And we only have about a couple more minutes. So he says, would you like me to release to you this King of the Jews? He says. Now, can you feel they're begging him to release a prisoner. They're there because they've got one person they want released. They do not care about this beat up, rough-looking guy from Galilee who is nobody there. None of Barabbas' folk, none of the chief priests and the scribes and the elders want to call this guy a king of the Jews. Pilate wants to release the king of the Jews. Why does he want to release the king of the Jews? Because it's a slap in the face to the Jews. Look at the guy, I'm releasing to you your king. Look at him. You can take him with you because at about 10:30 I got some things that are more important to go do. And you can have your king. And Barabbas would get crucified. Is this making sense? The one that they feel is the important person. There's a lot going on here. Pilate, he says this, and it says, for he now realized that the leading priests had arrested Jesus out of envy. The word that gives us envy there really means, this is a great place to stop. First off, Pilate had been dealing with these people for a long time. At least 6 or 7 years. He knew that they were only interested in keeping their own power. The word envy is okay. It's a word that means to be jealous, but it actually is a word that its root comes from the word that means to be spoiled, like rotten. Because in their thinking, somebody who was jealous of other people or envious of other people was of rotten character. And so he knew that these men who had brought Jesus to him, they were jealous of either Jesus' popularity or his power to heal people or something that made them bring him because they were rotten in their core. And that's what led them to be jealous of somebody who had this kind of a character. Does this make any sense? And Pilate knew it. He knew it. He'd worked with them a lot. And what did he want to do more than anything? He wanted to make them furious. He wanted to do whatever he could to ruin their day because he couldn't care less about those people. Because to him, they were people whose inner core was spoiled rotten. Okay? So everybody got this on? I mean, I've laid a lot on you. There's a lot going on in this. Where's that verse? How many verses are in this? 15 or 16? Yeah. So we have plenty to work with next week. This is, the more I think about it, there's a couple of things going on, and then I'll let you go. There's all this political drama and all this stuff going on. There's the reality of the people accusing Jesus, and you know, Pilate was right about them. He was right about their inner character that was spoiled rotten. He's right about that. And there's this interesting aspect that we suddenly have a crowd that's gathered up because their only purpose is to free Barabbas. It doesn't take much to get them to yell out, "Crucify Jesus," because they think they can get their man out of it. They don't have to know anything, or they don't have to know anything about it, because they'd only need a couple of, think about it, guys who are chief priests or elders in the community say, "Let's get Barabbas free and crucify Jesus." Everybody's going to go, yes, because why? Because the leaders of the nation are telling the crowd that this is what we should be about. It doesn't take, but the thing that's the most important in all of this is that the only person with the power to end all of it says nothing. And why does he say nothing? Because he loves you and me. That's what's going on. And we cannot forget that part. Because he did not have to go through any of this. But we were too valuable. Mankind. The very people, when Jesus says on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," we always think that he's talking about the people that crucified him. He's talking about those people who went to get Barabbas free too, because they didn't know what they were doing either. And we're going to see that in spades next week. Okay? Okay, thanks a lot. I'll see you next week.